Masechet Nazir Daf Zayin Mishnah that teaches Amar Hareni Nazir Achat Gedola, Hareni Nazir Achat Ketana, Afilu Mikan V'ad Sof HaOlam, Nazir Sheloshim Yom. We saw already that a standard Nazir, if you don't say anything, is going to be 30 days, and it's never less than 30 days. And so now we're going to see a few more formulas that also will translate into the standard 30 days. Someone says, I'm going to be one Nazir that's big. What he means by that is I'm going to be a Nazir for one time period, right? Not multiple Nazirot, but rather one. But it's going to be a big one. Even though he says that, it's still 30 days. Because what does that mean? How big is big? And also if he says I'm going to have one period of Nazirut, that's going to be small. That also is 30 days. These are undefined terms, and we just assume 30 days. And even if he says, I'm going to be Nazir Achat, the Gemara at the end of this sugya is going to clarify that he said that whole phrase also. I'm going to be one period of Nazir that's going to go from now until the end of the world, either spatially or as far as as long as it would take to get to the world, or time-wise, right, from now till the end of days. So meaning a very big number. Even though he says that, it's still 30 days. Okay, so now we're going to ask why. Amai. Why? Shouldn't he be a Nazir forever? His whole life? Since he said from now till the end of days? No, we understand him to mean that I'm going to be a Nazir, standard Nazir, 30 days. But it feels to me as if this is going to last from now to the end of the world, right? It's such a burden. All right, it's going to take forever. This is like, Yom Kippur, you're only fasting for 25 hours, but it feels like forever because it's so difficult. So too here. And so that explains the other formulas also, whether it's big or small. These are subjective terms. I mean, this is a big deal for me. This seems like a small deal for me, whatever it is. But since they're undefined, we understand him to mean the standard 30 days. All right, so far so good. But now we're going to have a challenge because we have a contradiction from a Mishnah coming up soon. It says, Tenan, Hareni Nazir Mikan Ad Makom Peloni. Omdim kama yamim mikan ועד מקום פלוני, פחות מ30 יום נזיר 30 יום, ואם לאו נזיר כמניין הימים. The Mishnah later on Daf Chet says, if a person says, I'm going to be a Nazir from here until that place, right? So if it's a certain distance, if it takes 10 days to walk from Yerushalayim to Haifa. And so he says, I'm going to be a Nazir from here, from Yerushalayim until Haifa. So we say, how many days does it take to walk there? Does it take 10 days? So then he's going to be, so we estimate how long it will be. If it's less than 30 days, well, you can't be a Nazir for less than 30 days, so then it gets 30. And if not, if it's more, if he says from here till I walk to somewhere far away, Aleppo, right? And it takes longer, 40 days to get there. Then it would be 40 days. Okay, good. So that's now. So we understand. So this is a challenge because how come in the Mishnah on Daf Chet we take him literally and we say, oh, let's count the number of days. And that's going to be the number of days that he will serve for one Nazirut. How come we don't say the same thing as we do in our Mishnah? That he just means that it feels like a long time to me, like going from here all the way to Aleppo. Why not say that? Right? How come in our Mishnah here we take his words figuratively and we assume it's 30 days? Whereas in this Mishnah we take his words literally and actually count the number of days. Amar Rava shechazik baderech. Rava explains that the Mishnah on Daf Chet is talking about a case where he actually already set out on the way. He is traveling. Since he's traveling, so then we understand him literally. Maybe he means, I'm going to be a Nazir from here until I arrive at Aleppo. Maybe by being a Nazir, that the merit of being a Nazir he hopes will protect him for whatever reason. But it's obvious that he is taking it literally because he is actually on the way. So he means from now until I get there, that many days. Whereas if he says from here till the end of the world, then obviously it doesn't mean that literally. So we can take that figuratively, just subjective. It feels like a long time. That's Rava's answer. All right. Now we're going to ask a question on that, the interpretation of this Mishnah here, when he says from here until Aleppo, we count the number of days, and he'll be a one Nazir for that number of days. He says, wait, that's not the only way to interpret that, even if we're going to take it literally and actually count something. Why not count every parsang, right? Parsang is a Persian length of distance, and so why not count from here to Aleppo? Is I don't know how long it is. Maybe it's 100 parsangs. So why not say that he has to be a Nazir 100 times, right? 30 days each, so 1 month each, 100 months of being consecutive Nazir periods. Maybe that's what he means, right? If he says Hareni Nazir, from here till there, maybe you count the number of parsangs and add them all up. How do you know it means that it's one Nazir period for that number of days? All right, good question. Mar Rav Papa, Beatra de la Mane Parse. Oh, Rav Papa, let's assume it's a place where they don't measure distance in parsangs. So there's no way he could have meant in parsangs. If they are in a place where they measure parsangs, then yeah, maybe he does mean that. Okay, fine. So we can get out of that. But we just bring up another, so they measure in some distance, in some way. Kol avana va'avana. So let us count by every way station that there is. Like, today on a highway, every 20 miles is a gas station, right? How many gas stations are there on the way? That's a way to calculate the distance. So if you're not using parsangs, using something, and just so say how many motels on the side, how many 7-Elevens from here till Aleppo, and you'll be that many. If there's 30 of them, so be a Nazir 30 times 30 months. Okay, Mila Tenan Hareni Nazir Kafar Haaretz. וכיסער על ראשי, וככל הים, הרי זה נזיר עולם, ומגלח אחד ל-30 יום. And now we're going to add proof to a support for our question that you should count individual numbers of Nazir periods from also Mishnah Daf Chet that says, if a person says, I'm going to be a Nazir like the dust of the earth, or like the hair on my head, or like the sand in the sea, then he is going to be a Nazir forever. This is not Nazir Olam, as we said before, who can shave, but who is Nazir straight through, but he can shave like once a year when it gets very long. This would be a Nazir forever, but successive Nazirut periods, 1 month each, 30 days each. So this person, since he says, like the hairs on my head, so how many hairs on someone's head? A lot. More than there are months in one's lifetime. And so that means he has to be, for every hair, that's going to be one Nazir period of 30 days, and then another 30 days from now until the end of his life. What do you see from here? That when someone says some number, that we don't count that number as numbers of days within one Nazir period, but rather that number indicates individual Nazir periods of 30 days each. And so now we're back with our question in that Mishnah on Daf Chet, when he says from here till Aleppo, why doesn't it mean that he should be a Nazir for every way station? From here to there, that'll be another 30-day period. Okay. And the answer is, Kol mileta d'it bekisuta lakatane. No, look at this Mishnah here. Anything that has a fixed amount is not included. What do we include here? Things that are uncountable, right? Basically infinite numbers. If you say a gigantic number, then that counts as individual Nazir periods that goes on forever, and that person would have to shave every month and then continue being a Nazir from now until the rest of his life. That's only if it's some kind of number that has no fixed amount that you can't count. But if it's talking about way stations from here to Aleppo, there's 30 way stations. It's not an infinite number. It's a countable number. So that's why in that case, we assume that it's something that would be the number of days for one Nazirut period. Or if you want to follow the number of days from how long it takes to walk from here to there, so it'll be that number of days. So it doesn't have to be individual Nazirut periods. It can be numbers of days within one Nazirut period. And we're going to back up this answer that, in fact, if it's a limited number, then that counts as numbers of days within one period. V'hatanya, after all, hareni nazir kol yemei hayai, hareni nazir olam, hare ze nazir olam. Afilo me'ah shana, afilo 1,000 shanim, en ze nazir olam, ela nazir le'olam. Okay, this Baraita is going to make a subtle distinction between Nazir Olam and Nazir Le'olam. If a person says, I'm going to be a Nazir all of my days, or I'm going to be a Nazir Olam, he is a Nazir Olam. All his days is an uncountable number. And so that would be the same as saying, I'm going to be a Nazir Olam, and that means he is a permanent Nazir, similar to Avshalom, who is a Nazir for his whole life, continuously, and that just means that he can shave when it gets very burdensome, like Avshalom, once a year. But otherwise, it's one long Nazirut period. However, if he says a fixed number, even if it's a big number, but it's still a fixed number, like 100 years, or even if he says 1,000 years, then he's not a Nazir Olam like Avshalom, but rather a Nazir le'olam, but rather he's going to be a Nazir, a regular Nazir who cannot shave at all, and he'll have to do that forever for the rest of his life. Now, the point of bringing this Baraita, even though they're both one continuous type of Nazirut, the point of the Baraita is simply to explain that there is a difference between saying one huge number, unlimited, uncountable number, like Kol Yemei Chayai, whereas between that and saying a countable number, even if it's a big number, but it's a countable number, even if it's 100 or 1,000. In this case, because he doesn't mention separate items, so there's no reason to separate his time period into separate Nazirut periods, because he only said, I'm going to be a Nazir. He just says all my days or this many years, and so we're not counting any individual items that would separate it into different periods of 30 days. But nevertheless, there is a difference. If he says all my days, an uncountable number, then that is a Nazir Olam, like Avshalom, and he can't shave when it gets too heavy, whereas 100 years or 1,000 years is one long regular Nazirut, which is more strict. So once we know that there is a difference between uncountable numbers and limited numbers, so that's a proof for what we say here. If someone is counting individual items and that are unlimited, uncountable, then that's going to mean that many Nazirut periods back to back, one after the other. Whereas if he says a limited number, like the number of days or way stations that it takes to get from here to there, then since it's a limited countable number, that's referring to the number of days within one Nazirut period, like the Sefa of this Baraita. All right, so far so good. Now, Rabbah Amad Shane Se'adot. Rabbah has a different answer to explain why, when someone refers to that in that Mishnah, hairs on one's head, it refers to multiple Nazirut periods forever. Whereas for the traveler, it refers to numbers of days. Because hairs are separate from one another, right? You can actually see each individual hair. So if he says, I'm a Nazir, like the hairs on my head, so each hair represents another Nazirut period of 30 days. That's why. Now we ask the obvious question. Regarding the Mishnah, also on Daf Chet, that says, if I'm going to be a Nazir from here until Aleppo, then that number of days, so number of days also are individual items, as it says in the Pasuk. There was night, there was evening, there was morning, and that is one day. So just like hairs are individual items, so 2 days are individual items, and a person should be a Nazir for 30 days, equivalent to the number of days it takes to travel from here to Aleppo. If it takes 30 days, he'll be a Nazir for 30 months, one back-to-back consecutive separate Nazirut periods. So what's the difference between them? And we answer something very interesting about the conception of time. Hatam lav de mifseke mehadadehu. No, over there, that in this pasuk, it does not mean that days are separate from each other. Rather, what is it saying? My kamad, yemama v'lelia had yomahu, ulolam la mafseke mehadadeh. Rather, when you experience a day and a night, then we call that a calendar day as a subjective experience in order to count down days, to have a calendar. But in reality, time just flows into each other. Day flows into night, right? It gets darker gradually and lighter gradually, and time simply flows. We could add today, we know that when it's daytime here, it's nighttime somewhere else. But even without knowing that, the point is, unlike hairs or pieces of sand that are individual items you can separate from each other, you cannot clearly separate a time period. In reality, this pasuk is just talking about our experience or our use of that time. We kind of artificially break it up for our own purposes. So that's very interesting, and lots of theorists think about what time really is from a psychological and a point of view or a scientific point of view. Okay, so this would be an important source for that. But anyway, the point is that these are different, and therefore when one measures from here to there a number of days, those are not separate items. It's a continuous time period. So what he means is, I'm going to be a Nazir for that length of time, that time period. Whereas when he says, I'm going to be a Nazir like a number of distinct items, so according to this answer of Rabbah, it's not about whether it's a uncountable or limited number. That's not his distinction, but rather simply because this is a continuous unit, whereas hairs are distinct units. Okay, Rabbah has a final answer. Remember, Rabbah is the one that gave the original explanation of the difference between our Mishnah, where he says from now to the end of the world, and he means it figuratively. That just means 30 days. Whereas the Mishnah on Daf Chet, Rava explains, is when he's actually on the way. Okay, good. So this statement of Rava, it's not clear if he's giving another answer to what just came before, or another answer to the original question. If it's the original question, Rava already answered the original question. So let's interpret it as if he's giving another answer to the question that came right before, of what's the difference between the Mishnayot and Daf Chet. Oh, how come if I say I'm going to be a Nazir from here till Aleppo, we count it as one long period? Whereas when he says the hairs on my head, we count that as separate periods. Rava says very simply, Rava Amar, Lama lach lakshuye kolahai. I don't have to bother with all these questions. You're making it too complicated. Shane hatam tahakatani hareni nazir achat. In the case of traveling from here to there, he says, I'm going to be a nazir achat, one nazir. And then he explains the time period. That's what we take it as, one Nazirut. If he would say, Hadeni Nazir Achat, like the hairs on my head, then also we would take it as one Nazir period, and we would define the length of that one period as a number of days of hairs equal to the number of hairs on his head. So it has to do with the word Achat. Okay, now the word achat actually only appears in our Mishnah that we just read, when he says from now till the end of the world. It does not appear in the next Mishnah on Daf Chet, when he says from when I travel from here to Aleppo. But as Tosafot explains, Rava may be assuming that these are parallel cases. From now till the end of the world, from one achat from now till the end of the world, or achat from here till I get there. So he is transferring the word achat and assuming that it's the same in that case of the similar traveling case. And if we do that, then that would be a simple explanation for the difference to explain the difference between the outcome of the Mishnayot that are both on Daf Chet. All right, we'll get to Daf Chet soon, but first there's two more Mishnayot on this Daf. Next one says, Hareni Nazir v'yom echad, Hareni Nazir v'sha'a achat, Hareni Nazir achat u'mechesa, Hareze Nazir shetayim. Someone says, I'm going to be a Nazir. That word by itself means he's going to be a Nazir for 30 days. And then he adds, and also one day. Now, we don't take that to mean that he's going to be a Nazir for 31 days. Because he didn't say, I'm going to be a Nazir for 31 days. He says, Harei Nazir, that's 30. And adding and one day is adding another period of being a Nazir. you can't be a Nazir for just one day, so we expand that one day to be 30 days. And therefore, he has to be a Nazir for 30 plus 30. Okay. Even if he says, I'm going to be a Nazir and 1 hour, also you can't be a Nazir for an hour. So same thing. Hadini Nazir means 30 days. And also, I'm going to be a Nazir for an hour. That hour expands into an additional 30 days. Similarly, if he says, I'm going to be a Nazir, 1 Nazir and a half. So that means he's a Nazir. That's 1 Nazir. Very good. And then Umechsa, a half a Nazir, that means 15 days. But you can't just be a Nazir 15 days, so that expands to another 30. That's 30 and 30 separately, right? And all these are because he says the similar formula. I'm a Nazir, that's 30 days, and then by adding and also, whatever you're going to add after and also, that's going to expand to a minimum of 30 days. Okay, so that's pretty clear. The Gemara says it's too simple. Why do you have to bother with all these examples? Right? Just tell me one example and I could figure out the rest. And the answer is Sirichi. Ditana hareni nazir v'yom echad. Hachod amrinan en nizirut l'yom echad. Ametu lehachi kamane tarten. Aval hareni nazir v'sha achat. Limne shiloshim ve'echad yom. Kamash malan. As I need all the cases. Because if I only had the first one, where a person says, I'm a Nazir and also 1 day, and we know that there's no such thing as being a Nazir for less than 1 day, so that's why he becomes 2 separate 30-day periods. But if he says, I'm a Nazir and 1 hour, I might think what he means by 1 hour as, because an hour is just part of a day. You count the length of Nazir period in terms of days, right? It makes sense to say 30 days, 45 days, 100 days. You can do anything with days. So when he says, and a day, that is a part of a Nazirut, so that's going to be a whole another Nazirut. But if he says 1 hour, that's an hour is not a subdivision of a Nazirut. You can't say I'm going to be a Nazir for 40 days and 2 hours. It doesn't work. It goes by whole days. Therefore, I might have thought that when he says an hour, what he means is, okay, I'll expand that into a day and make it 31 days. So I might have thought that. Therefore, Kamash Malan, when he says and 1 hour, I'm going to expand that into a whole day, and that whole day will expand to a whole Nazirut. So yes, we expand the hour into a whole separate Nazirut, even though it's only an hour. Vitana sha'achat mishum de la nachit ledavka, aval achat umechsa de nachit ledavka, emala limte tarte, kamash malan kuluhu nazir shetayim. And if I said only the second case of Nazir and 1 hour, I would say because an hour is not a specific detail. It just means I want to, a longer than 1 Nazirut. So and once it's longer, then it's going to be a full Nazirut, because an hour is not a marker. But if he says 1.5, which is an exact detailed marker, a person can be a Nazir for 45 days, right? Which is a Nazirut term and a half. So since that is a precisely possible time period, I might have thought we should not count it as 2 separate, but rather as 1 45-day. And that's why it teaches that Mishnah also, that even there we treat it as two statements, two Nazir periods, 130 days, and then the other one, which you said half, but there's no such thing as 15 days only, also expands into 30 days. And the last Mishnah. Hareni Nazir Shiloshim Yom Vesha Achat, Nazir Shiloshim Ve'echad Yom Shen Nazirut L'Sha'ot. Someone says, I'm going to be a Nazir for 30 days and 1 hour. He becomes a Nazir for 1 31-day period, because you can't be a Nazir for only an hour, so we expand that hour to be a whole day, and that ends up being 31 days. Okay, this is different from the previous Mishnah, because in that Mishnah he said, I am a Nazir and 1 hour. So Harini Nazir, that means 30 days. And then he adds an hour, so that adds a whole nother Nazirut. Here he didn't say that. He said, I am a Nazir for 30 days and 1 hour. So then he's just saying 1 time period. Rav will make this clearer as well. Amar Rav lo shanu elad amar shiloshim ve'echad yom. Aval amar shiloshim yom ve'yom echad nazir shetayim. Rav explains, this is only true when he said 30 days and another day. Rav is saying another day or another hour, right? The point is that whether you say an hour or a day, if you say it within one phrase, 30 and 1 day, 30 and 1 hour, then it's all one period. But if you add an extra word, 30 days, shaloshim yom, and yom echad, well, then by adding an extra word, another word, meaning the day, shaloshim yom, and then adding an and, veyom echad, then that's, by adding this word yom, that's clear that you mean 2 separate time periods. And that's why in the previous Mishnah also, it says, I'm going to be a Nazir. So that's it. That's like 30 days. It's like saying shaloshim yom in one word, and then the sha'achat, or extra yom echad, is a second nazirut. Okay, so that's what Rav explains, and now we're just going to explain the Rav's theory. Rav savar la Rabbi Akiva de darish lishna yetera. Rav must agree with Rabbi Akiva, who in a completely different scenario says that we do derive a law from an extra language, an extra word that actually doesn't even need to be there, because you don't need to say this many days and another day. But the extra word can have significance, as here when you say shaloshim yom and yom echad, adding that word yom makes it into 2 time periods. Where do we see that Rabbi Akiva thinks that this is true? Ditnan lo etabor velo tadut af al pi shekatab lo umkaved uma v'sarich likach lo derech devrei Rabbi Akiva. We're talking about a case in Baba Batra where a seller sells a house to a buyer, and in the house there is a pit or a cistern. And he didn't say in the contract that he's selling him the pit and the cistern. He just said, I'm selling you the house. The buyer does not get the pit, just to say the cistern in the house. And even if he writes in the contract that you get the depth and the height, all the way up, all the way down, still that only means the height and the basement, but it doesn't mean the cistern. So the buyer doesn't get it. However, Rabbi Akiva says that the seller has to buy back from the buyer a right of way in order to get to his cistern, because after all, he sold the whole house, including the hallways and every way to get there. So you have this interesting scenario. So the buyer does not get the cistern, the seller keeps it, but the seller will need to buy back. Chachamim agree that the cistern does not go to the buyer. However, they say since the cistern doesn't go to the buyer and the seller keeps it, so it's implied that the seller also keeps a right of way to get there, and so he doesn't have to buy it back. Okay. However, Rabbi Akiva agrees that if the seller said, if in the contract it says, I'm selling you the house and I'm not selling you the cistern, right, except for the cistern, since he said those words explicitly, then he does not have to buy a right to get there back, because then it is very obvious that he's keeping the cistern and the right to go there. So here's where we see that these are extra words, chutz me'elu. You don't have to say them. Whether you put in the word except for the cistern or leave that out, the cistern still stays with the seller. So there's no difference in meaning. He keeps the cistern either way. These are extra words. Nevertheless, these superfluous words do have a legal impact in that if they're not there, the seller has to buy a right of way. If they are there, the seller does not have to buy a right of way. And so that's similar to here in our case. If he says 30 days and another hour, by adding that extra word, that makes it 2 separate time periods. And so you see, adding an extra word, even though in terms of just syntax, it means the same thing, but when we parse it legally, it can have an important legal impact. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'Amen.